The first thing I heard wasn't a congratulations. It was the sound of a guillotine, disguised as a professional courtesy. The phone call came on a Tuesday, the kind of brilliantly sunny day in Los Angeles that feels like a personal insult when your world is ending. The book, Radiant Dawn, had hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list just that morning. My book, the one I had written, bled for, and built from the ground up, all under the gilded name of Simone, the celebrity wellness guru whose deepest thought was whether kale or spinach had better PR that week. For 2 years I was her shadow, her voice, her memory. I was the architect of her soul. The voice on the phone belonged to Julian, Simone's agent. He had a voice like expensive whiskey poured over gravel, smooth but with a calculated roughness that made you feel like you were in on a secret. The secret, I was about to learn, was that I was disposable. He didn't even start with small talk. He said with the breezy efficiency of a man swatting a fly, "Maeve, congratulations on the numbers. We're all thrilled. Simone is over the moon." Then the pause, the kind of pause that isn't for dramatic effect, but for the quiet, logistical unholstering of a weapon, as per Section 7B of your contract. With the successful publication and launch of the primary work, we are exercising our right to terminate our agreement, effective immediately. I remember staring at the ficus tree in my apartment, its leaves dusty in the morning light. I couldn't process the words, terminated. It sounded so sterile, so corporate. It felt like being told your heart was being downsized. I had spent 24 months inside Simone's life, or rather, the life she wanted the world to believe she had. I took her rambling, incoherent anecdotes about ayahuasca retreats and crystal-infused water and spun them into poignant parables of self-discovery. I crafted a voice for her that was warm, wise, and vulnerable, everything she wasn't. I gave her my best words, my most poetic turns of phrase, my late-night epiphanies born from caffeine and desperation. The book wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon, and I was being fired on the day of our collective victory. I think I said something like, "I don't understand." The sequel, we were supposed to start outlining next month. Julian's sigh was a masterpiece of condescension. He said, "The publisher is handling the sequel internally. Simone has a clear vision for the next phase of her brand. Your services are no longer required." It was the word services that finally broke through the shock. It was so diminishing, so transactional. It was the verbal equivalent of scraping a shoe on a dirty doormat. Then came the final twist of the knife. He added, "And Maeve, for brand clarity, we've made a small update to the digital and future print editions. It was a mutual decision to streamline the acknowledgments. We feel it's best to keep the focus entirely on Simone's personal journey. Streamline the acknowledgments." He meant they had erased my name. The one sentence, buried on page 347, that had been my only public claim to the 2 years of my life I had sacrificed. My proof of work, gone. I hung up the phone without saying another word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the silence of my apartment, the sunlight feeling colder by the second. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything, erased me completely, and left me with nothing but a final paycheck and a bitter taste in my mouth. They thought I was just a writer, a service provider. What they didn't know, what Simone in her blissful narcissistic ignorance and Julian in his reptilian arrogance had completely overlooked, was that the future of their precious brand, the multi-million-dollar advance for the sequel, was entirely contingent on a proposal I had already written, a proposal I had been forced to submit as a final deliverable for my contract. And inside that proposal, woven into the very fabric of the chapter outlines, was a trap, a digital watermark, a coded message that no one would ever notice, but one that only I could verify. It was an acrostic, a ghost in their machine. My ghost. It spelled out my name, and it spelled out a warning, and I had already alerted Simone's biggest rival. They were just waiting for the bait. They were waiting for Simone to submit my work as her own, and when she did, they would be ready to expose the whole fraudulent empire. This is the story of how I took back my name. But before we get into the details of the plan, the allies I found in the shadows, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a hollow empire crumble, I need to know I'm not just shouting this into the void. If you've ever been underestimated, had your work stolen, or felt like your contributions were being erased, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. It helps more than you know to feel like you're not alone. The first hour after the call was a blur of unnatural calm. It's the body's strange self-defense mechanism, the shock that acts like a numbing agent before the real pain sets in. I remember walking to my kitchen, pouring a glass of water, and watching my hand tremble slightly. It was like observing a stranger. Who was this person? So still, so quiet, in the face of such a colossal betrayal. The woman I knew would have been throwing things, or at the very least, ugly crying into a pillow, but I did nothing. I sat on my cheap IKEA sofa, the one that always creaked, and just listened to the sounds of the city outside my window. Sirens, traffic, the distant chatter of people living their normal lives. My life had just been detonated, and the world hadn't even flinched. Then the numbness began to recede. It retreated like a tide going out, leaving behind the jagged, sharp rocks of reality. 2 years, 730 days. I thought about the first time I met Simone. It was at a ridiculously chic vegan restaurant in Venice, the kind of place where the waiters look like models, and the water menu is longer than the food menu. She had arrived 45 minutes late, smelling of expensive essential oils and unapologetic self-importance. She had this way of talking that was both vague and absolute. She'd say things like, "The universe is calling us to embody our most authentic light," and then complain that her matcha latte wasn't frothed to the precise temperature she preferred. I was a journalist back then, scraping by, writing freelance pieces on art and culture, but I had a knack for voice. I could listen to someone for an hour and then write in their cadence, their rhythm, their soul. A mutual acquaintance had recommended me to Julian, who was looking for a collaborator for Simone's memoir. Collaborator was the industry's polite term for ghostwriter. It was the word they used to make the person doing all the actual work feel slightly less invisible. From the beginning, it was clear Simone had no story. Not a real one, anyway. She had a collection of disconnected moments, polished and curated for Instagram, but no connective tissue, no vulnerability, no truth. My job was to invent it. I spent hundreds of hours interviewing her. I'd sit in her cavernous, all-white living room, a space so sterile it felt like an art installation about loneliness, and I would try to coax something real out of her. It was like trying to find water in a desert. She would talk for hours, a long looping monologue of spiritual buzzwords and name drops, but there was nothing at the center of it, no core. So I built one for her. I took the thread of her difficult relationship with her mother, a topic she mentioned once for 30 seconds, and I wove it into a powerful narrative of forgiveness and self-acceptance. I took her story of a failed juice bar business and transformed it into a parable about embracing failure on the path to success. I invented dialogue. I created emotional arcs. I gave her a history, a personality, a voice that millions of people would come to love. I remember one night, around 3 a.m, fueled by coffee that tasted like battery acid, I was writing a chapter about her supposed moment of rock bottom. I was describing the profound emptiness she felt, the feeling of being a stranger in her own life. I wrote so deeply from that place of despair that I started to cry. Not for her, but for the character I had created, the Simone on the page who was so much more human than the real one. That's when I knew I had done it. I had created a person out of thin air. This wasn't just a job for me, it was a test. I had always been the one behind the scenes, the editor, the polisher. I wanted to see if I could create a masterpiece, even if my name wasn't on the cover. It was a private act of artistic pride. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, as long as the work was good. That was the lie I fed myself for 2 years. A lie that tasted like ash now. The memories started to flood in, each one a small cut. I remembered the time I submitted a chapter I thought was the best thing I'd ever written. Simone emailed me back with a single note, "Can we make this more sparkly?" I remembered Julian calling me once, his voice slick with false camaraderie, to tell me that Simone had an incredible idea for a chapter. An idea that was word for word what I had pitched to him a week earlier. They weren't just taking my work, they were re-gifting it to me as their own, and they expected me to be grateful. There was a particularly painful memory of the book cover shoot. I was on set just to make sure the tagline and the bio I'd written were correct. Simone was posing in a field of wildflowers, her white linen dress catching the golden hour light. She looked ethereal. She looked like the wise, gentle soul I had invented. At one point, she turned to the photographer and said, "It's so strange. Sometimes the words just flow through me. I feel like a vessel for some universal truth." I stood there, just out of frame, holding a clipboard and a lukewarm coffee, and I felt a cold, quiet rage build in my stomach. A vessel? She was an empty jar I had filled. The worst part was my own complicity. I had let it happen. I had cashed the checks. I had smiled and nodded in meetings. I had swallowed my pride and my anger because I believed in the project. I believed that at the end of it all, there would be some acknowledgement, some small nod to the architect. My contract, a boilerplate work-for-hire agreement, was brutally clear. I had no ownership, no royalties, no claim to the intellectual property. My only leverage, my only piece of currency, was the promise of the sequel. Julian had dangled it in front of me for months. He'd say things like, "Just get us through this launch, Maeve. The next book is where you'll really be able to build your brand alongside Simone's. You'll be a co-author, not a collaborator." It was a classic bait and switch. I had been so focused on the future carrot that I didn't realize they were already selling the donkey I was riding. This is a debatable point, I know. A lot of people would say I was a fool. Why would you pour your soul into something for someone so obviously hollow? Why would you trust people who showed you, time and again, who they were? It wasn't about logic. It was about a deep, almost pathological need to prove my own worth. To myself more than anyone. I thought that if I could create something truly beautiful, it would be undeniable. The work would speak for itself, and by extension for me. I believed in meritocracy in an industry that runs on nepotism and smoke. It was a naive belief, and the price of that naivete was my professional heart, filleted and served on a platter. The breakdown finally came, not as a storm, but as a quiet, internal collapse. I went to the bookshelf where I kept my copy of Radiant Dawn. It had arrived yesterday, a courtesy copy. I opened it to the acknowledgments page. There it was, or rather where it should have been. A blank space between a thank you to her yoga instructor and her personal chef. The line I had drafted and approved with Julian was supposed to read, "And to Maeve, my collaborator and friend, whose brilliant words gave this story its wings." Now there was just nothing, an erasure, a void where my name should have been. That's when the tears started. Hot, silent tears of pure fury. It wasn't just about the credit. It was about the negation of my existence. They hadn't just fired me. They had attempted to unwrite me from my own story. They wanted it to seem as if the book had sprung fully formed from Simone's divinely inspired mind. And for a moment, sitting there on my floor, with the useless, heavy book in my lap, I felt like they had succeeded. I felt like a ghost. Then, something shifted. The image of that blank space burned in my mind, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it, the audacity, and the self-pity began to curdle into something else. Something cold, hard, and clear. It was resolve. It wasn't a fiery, passionate anger. It was a quiet, precise, and utterly unshakable certainty. They had made a mistake. They had underestimated me. They assumed I was just a poet, a dreamer who could be easily discarded. They had forgotten that to build a world out of nothing, you have to be more than a dreamer. You have to be an architect. And architects know how to build, but they also know where the load-bearing walls are. They know how to bring a building down. I stood up and walked to my laptop. It was time to stop mourning and start building. But this time, I wasn't building for Simone. I was building a parachute for myself, and I was constructing a cage for them. This was never about revenge. It was about correction. It was about restoring a fundamental truth to the world, that work has value, and the person who does the work has a name. My name is Maeve, and they were about to learn just how much that name was worth. The seed of the plan had been planted months ago, born not of foresight, but of professional anxiety. Every creator knows that fear, the one that whispers, "What if they just take your ideas and run?" It's a low-grade hum of paranoia that lives in the back of your mind. For me, working with Simone and Julian, that hum had become a roar. I didn't trust them. I couldn't afford to. My self-preservation instinct, long dormant under a blanket of creative passion, had finally woken up. It happened about 6 months before the book launch. We were in a tense meeting about the marketing plan. I was pushing for a more authentic, grounded approach, while Simone was obsessed with a synergistic activation with a brand of adaptogenic mushroom coffee that tasted like dirt. Julian, as always, was playing both sides, agreeing with me about the substance while placating Simone's ego. It was exhausting. After the meeting, Julian pulled me aside. He said, "Maeve, the publisher is already chomping at the bit for the sequel. They're talking a massive advance, life-changing money, but it's all contingent on a strong proposal. We need chapter outlines, a full concept, the works. I need you to draft it. It's part of your final deliverable for book 1. That was the moment. The demand was so brazen. They wanted my best ideas for the next project before they'd even proven they would honor my contribution to the first. It was a test of my loyalty, but I saw it for what it was, a harvest. They wanted to strip mine my creativity and leave me with nothing. My contract did indeed state that a proposal for a potential second work was a deliverable. A previous lawyer I couldn't really afford had glanced at it and said it was standard, if a bit aggressive. But the contract never specified the content of that proposal, only its existence. That small ambiguity was my way in. It was the crack in the foundation where I could plant the dynamite. I told Julian I'd get right on it, and I did. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting the most brilliant, compelling, and commercially viable proposal I could imagine. I titled it The Meridian Self, a concept about finding your true north in a world of conflicting advice. I designed a whole new lexicon of wellness terms, created a narrative arc that would take readers on a powerful emotional journey, and I outlined 12 perfect chapters. It was a guaranteed bestseller. It was also a Trojan horse. The creation of the digital watermark, as I called it, was my own quiet act of rebellion. It wasn't some complex bit of code. It was simpler, more elegant, and far more poetic. It was an acrostic, hidden in plain sight within the chapter descriptions. The first rule of hiding something is to place it where everyone is looking but no one is seeing. In a book proposal, everyone reads the chapter titles, but they skim the one-paragraph descriptions for the gist. They look for keywords, market hooks. They don't look for patterns. I spent an entire weekend on it, playing with words like a poet crafting a sonnet. It had to be seamless. It couldn't feel forced or clunky. For the first acrostic, my name, I chose specific, slightly unusual words to begin each of the first 5 chapter descriptions. The first chapter was about clearing mental clutter. The description began, "Myriad distractions pull at our modern consciousness." Chapter 2, on physical wellness, started with, "Allowing the body to find its innate rhythm." Chapter 3, on emotional resilience. "Every challenge we face is an opportunity." Chapter 4, on relationships. "Vulnerability is not weakness, it is the most courageous act." And Chapter 5, on finding purpose. Emerging from the shadows of self-doubt is the first step. It was there, invisible to a casual reader, but as clear as a signature to someone who knew where to look. But a name wasn't enough. I needed a warning. I needed to embed the accusation directly into the document, so I created a second acrostic, woven into the descriptions for chapters 6 through 10. This one was more direct. Forgetting our core truth leads to imbalance. Reclaiming it is the ultimate journey. Authenticity cannot be manufactured. Underneath the performance, we must find the person. Discovering that truth is the work, fraud. There it was. My name, followed by my verdict, a time bomb, sitting quietly on a server in Julian's office, waiting. After I sent the proposal, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had done the work as contracted, but I had also built myself an escape hatch. It was a move born of desperation, but now, sitting in my apartment after being fired, it was my only source of power. It was my hidden leverage. The next step was to find an ally. I couldn't expose this alone. I would just be a disgruntled ex-employee. I needed a platform. I needed a rival with a motive, and I knew exactly who to call. His name was Arthur Vance. He was a senior editor at Veritas Press, one of the oldest and most respected publishing houses in New York. They were the opposite of Elysian Press, Simone's publisher, which was all flash and trends. Veritas was substance, prestige, and journalistic integrity. I had met Arthur once, a year prior. I was with Julian at a publisher's cocktail party. I was mostly there to carry Simone's coat and laugh at her jokes. I was functionally invisible, but at one point I got into a conversation with Arthur by the bar. He had asked what I did, and I told him I was a writer, currently collaborating on a large nonfiction project. We talked for 20 minutes about narrative structure and the challenge of finding an authentic voice. He was sharp, thoughtful, and treated me not as an accessory, but as a peer. As he was leaving, he handed me his card and said, "If you ever decide to write your own story, I'd be interested in reading it." His words had been a small island of validation in a sea of condescension. I had kept his card. My hand was shaking as I dialed his number. It was a huge risk. If he didn't believe me, or if he was too corporate to get involved, I would have revealed my only card for nothing. He answered on the second ring, his voice exactly as I remembered it, calm and professional. I said, "Arthur, my name is Maeve. We met last year at the PEN America Gala. I was with Julian Croft. I half expected him to have no memory of me, but he said immediately, "Of course, the writer. I was hoping you'd call me someday, though I admit I'm surprised it's today. I saw the numbers for Radiant Dawn. Congratulations. Your work is remarkable." He had said your work, not Simone's work. He knew. In that moment, I knew I had found my ally. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The 2 years of work, the ghostwriting, the promises of a co-authorship on the sequel, the phone call that morning, the erasure from the acknowledgments. I told him everything, my voice steady, laying out the facts like a prosecutor. He listened patiently, without interrupting. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a horrifying second, I thought I had misjudged him. Then he spoke, and his voice was cold steel. He said, "Julian Croft is a parasite, and Elysian Press has been getting away with this kind of thing for years. I'm not surprised, I'm just angry. Tell me, Maeve, what do you want to happen?" I said, "I want the truth to come out, and I want to make sure they can't profit from the work they are about to steal from me." He asked, "What work?" I explained about the proposal for the Meridian Self. I told him it was my best work, and that Simone and Julian were planning to submit it as their own to secure the sequel's advance. Then I told him about the acrostic. There was another pause, and then I heard him let out a low whistle. "That's not just a smoking gun, Maeve," he said, his voice now filled with a kind of grim excitement. "That's a confession, written in their own hand, and they don't even know it. This is a gift." It turned out Arthur had his own history with Elysian Press. Years ago, they had poached one of his rising star authors, a brilliant young novelist. They had used dirty tactics, making false promises and exploiting a loophole in the author's contract. The author's career had stalled under their mismanagement, and Arthur had never forgiven them. He saw this as more than just a good story. He saw it as an opportunity for a long overdue reckoning. It wasn't just about my betrayal, it was about a pattern of predatory behavior. We spent the next 2 hours on the phone, mapping out the strategy. It was like a scene from a spy movie, 2 co-conspirators planning a quiet coup. Arthur's mind was brilliant, a perfect fusion of literary sensibility and cutthroat corporate strategy. He explained the plan. "First, we do nothing. We wait. We let them walk into the trap." He said, "They have to submit that proposal to their publisher. Their arrogance is our greatest asset. They won't change a single word, because they believe Simone's vision is sacred. Julian is too lazy and Simone is too clueless to do the work of rewriting it." Once the proposal was officially submitted by Elysian, a process he had an inside source to track, Veritas Press would make its first move. It wouldn't be a direct accusation. It would be a subtle inquiry. Arthur would use his connections at a major publishing trade magazine to plant a question. A journalist would call Elysian's publicity department and say something like, "We're doing a piece on upcoming blockbusters for next year. We got a tip about Simone's sequel, The Meridian Self. We noticed some very clever, almost poetic word choices in the chapter outlines. Was that intentional? A kind of literary Easter egg for her fans?" The question was designed to cause maximum panic. It was specific enough to let them know that someone else had seen the proposal, but vague enough that they wouldn't immediately understand the nature of the threat. It would force them to look closer at the document they had stolen, and with any luck they would find the acrostics themselves. Their discovery of the trap was a key part of the plan. Arthur wanted them to sweat. He wanted them to understand the depth of their miscalculation before the world did. While they were scrambling, Arthur would be preparing the real story. He asked me to send him everything: emails, contract drafts, notes, anything that could substantiate my claims. He was building a dossier. The acrostic would be the hook for the story, the sensational detail that would get everyone's attention. But the real meat would be the documented history of creative theft. Arthur said, "We're not just going to expose the fraud of one book, we're going to expose the fraudulent nature of their entire business model." Finally, he made me a promise. He said, "Maeve, when this is over, Veritas would like to publish The Meridian Self under your name and your name alone. We'll even call the book that, if you like. It has a nice ring to it. And we would also like to offer you a position here, at Veritas, not as a ghost but as an editor-at-large. We need people who understand how a story is built from the inside out. We need architects." I hung up the phone, and for the first time all day I smiled. A real smile. The plan was in motion. The pieces were on the board. All I had to do was wait for my opponent to make their move. This wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about narrative justice. It was about ensuring that the story ended with the right person holding the pen. The waiting was the hardest part. For 3 weeks, I existed in a state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of my life, paying bills, buying groceries, answering emails from friends asking me how it felt to have written a #1 bestseller. I'd give them a vague, non-committal answer, feeling like a fraud in a different way. Every morning, I'd check the publishing news websites, my stomach twisting into a knot of anticipation and anxiety. My entire plan, my entire future, hinged on the predictable arrogance of 2 people I despised. It was a terrifying gamble. My only lifeline was Arthur. We spoke every other day. He was a calming presence, a steady hand in the storm of my own making. He'd give me small updates from his source inside Elysian Press. He told me the sequel had been greenlit, the advance approved, all contingent on the final proposal being logged in the publisher's system. It was moving through the pipeline. My Trojan horse was rolling slowly toward the gates of the city. During this time, I needed a way to feel productive, to do something other than pace around my apartment. So I started to write. Not for Simone, not for a client, but for me. I began to work on the real version of the Meridian self. I exorcised all of Simone's vapid spirituality from it, and replaced it with genuine, hard-won insights. I wrote about the nature of creative ownership, about the quiet power of the people who work in the shadows, about the difference between a brand and a soul. The words poured out of me, clear and strong. It was my voice, undistreated, for the first time in years. It felt like breathing after being held underwater. To make ends meet, I also took on a small, anonymous project. A subplot in my life, you could say. I was hired to edit the doctoral dissertation of a brilliant but scattered history professor. His subject was the intricate political maneuvering of Renaissance-era Florence, a world of spies, secret alliances, and public betrayals. It was strangely therapeutic. I spent my days immersed in the quiet, methodical work of clarifying someone else's genius, my nights plotting a modern-day Florentine takedown of my own. The professor, a kind, elderly man named Dr. Alistair Finch, was a joy to work with. He respected my input, valued my eye for structure, and always, without fail, gave me credit. In one email, he wrote, "Maeve, you are a master architect of prose. You don't just fix sentences, you reinforce the very foundation of the argument." His words were a balm on the raw wound of Simone's betrayal. It was a reminder that there were still people in the world who understood and respected the craft. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the call came. It was Arthur. His voice was quiet, tense. He said one word, "It's in." My proposal, my time bomb. It had been officially logged in Elysian's central server. It was now an official document, a piece of their intellectual property, according to them. The trap was set. Arthur told me he had already made the call. The journalist from Publishers Weekly, a sharp, tenacious reporter named Clara, was on it. The inquiry had been made. The first, gentle tremor had been sent through the foundations of their empire. Now we wait for the screaming to start, Arthur had said, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. I needed to know what was happening inside the belly of the beast. For that I had one final, reluctant ally, a junior publicist at Elysian named Chloe. I had been kind to her during the launch of Radiant Dawn. I had seen how Julian and the other senior staff treated her like a piece of furniture. I had always made a point of remembering her name, asking about her weekend, and thanking her for her hard work. It was simple human decency, but in a place like Elysian, it was a radical act. It had earned me a small measure of loyalty. I sent her a carefully worded text. "Hey Chloe, hope you're well. Crazy question, but is there some kind of fire drill happening in the office today? Just getting some weird bounce backs from my old email." Her reply came almost instantly. "Maeve, it's a total madhouse. Everyone from the 12th floor is in a glass-walled conference room. Julian is red in the face. I've never seen anything like it." That was all I needed. I could picture the scene perfectly. Julian, his slick composure finally cracking, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. The other executives, their faces a mask of confused concern. And somewhere in that building, Simone was probably being told there was a small brand alignment issue they needed to sort out, completely oblivious to the fact that the brand itself was about to be set on fire. Clara's inquiry had worked exactly as Arthur had predicted. The mention of a literary Easter egg had sent them into a paranoid spiral. According to Chloe's follow-up texts, Julian had pulled up the proposal on the main conference room screen. He had started reading the chapter descriptions aloud, his voice full of bluster at first, trying to find the cleverness the reporter was talking about. And then, he must have seen it. Someone in that room must have noticed the first letters. M-A-E-V-E. Chloe texted. OMG. Julian just threw his tablet. It shattered against the glass wall. I read her text and felt a cold, clean wave of vindication wash over me. I imagined the moment of dawning horror in that room. The slow, sickening realization that the document they thought was their key to a fortune was in fact a confession. I imagined them scrolling down, their dread mounting, until they found the second word, F-R-A-U-D. They were trapped. If they tried to change the proposal now, after it had been logged, they would be creating a record of tampering. If they submitted it as is, they were marching toward a public guillotine, and if they pulled the project, they would lose the massive advance and have to explain to their board why Simone's blockbuster sequel had suddenly vanished. I had left them with no good moves. It was checkmate, and they had just realized they were playing the game. The panic at Elysian Press was an opera, and I had a front-row seat thanks to Chloe's clandestine dispatches. Her texts came in short, frantic bursts, painting a vivid picture of an implosion in real time. Julian is demanding it run a forensic scan on the document. He's shouting about corporate espionage. It was almost funny. He was the thief, screaming that he'd been robbed. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. Simone has arrived. She's not crying. She's just yelling. Something about her aura being compromised. I could practically hear Simone's shrill, uncomprehending rage. Her entire worldview was built on the idea that good things happened to her because the universe willed it. The concept that someone, a service provider no less, had outmaneuvered her was simply not compatible with her reality. It was easier to blame a compromised aura than to accept her own catastrophic lack of judgment. The next text from Chloe was the one I was waiting for. They found the second one. Fraud. Silence in the room now. Just the publisher staring at Julian. This was the moment of quiet devastation. The bluster and the shouting had evaporated, replaced by the cold, heavy reality of their situation. They had been caught, not just in a lie, but in a carefully constructed trap that mocked their own incompetence. The silence in that room was the sound of my victory. While they were imploding, Arthur and I were executing the second phase of the plan. He had given the full dossier to Clara at Publishers Weekly. It contained my sworn affidavit, copies of my contract, email exchanges with Julian where he'd promised me future credit, and of course a clean copy of the Meridian self-proposal with the acrostics highlighted. But Arthur had added another layer. He had used Veritas's resources to find 2 other ghostwriters who had been burned by Elysian Press in the past. They had agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity, their stories corroborating the pattern of exploitation. This was no longer just about me and Simone. It was about a systemic problem. The first public shot was fired 2 days later. It wasn't the full exposé, but a small, surgically precise article on the Publishers Weekly website. The headline was Elysian Press delays highly anticipated Simone sequel amid creative reevaluation. The article was bland on the surface, full of corporate speak sourced from a panicked Elysian publicist. But it contained one devastating sentence, buried in the 3rd paragraph. Sources close to the project suggest the delay may be linked to questions of authorship and the integrity of the proposed material. Questions of authorship. That phrase was a depth charge. In the publishing world, it was the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater. It was a signal to every agent, every author, and every competitor that something was deeply wrong at Elysian. The stock photo of Simone accompanying the article, a serene smile on her face, now looked absurd, a mask of false tranquility on a crumbling facade. The fallout was immediate and beautiful to watch. Arthur called me, his voice buzzing with energy. He said, "The phones are ringing off the hook all over town. Every agent is calling their authors who have deals with Elysian. Everyone wants to know what questions of authorship means. You've made them radioactive, Maeve." It was working faster than I had ever imagined. The noise of their panic was deafening, a stark contrast to the quiet, methodical precision of our attack. I imagined Julian's office, the endless ringing of his phone, the flood of angry emails. He had built his career on managing perceptions, on spinning narratives, but you can't spin a story when the story is about the spinner being a fraud. Then came Simone's desperate countermove. It was both pathetic and predictable. An email from her personal account landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "We need to talk." The email itself was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit fault. Instead, she tried to reframe the entire situation as a misunderstanding, a misalignment of energies that could be corrected if I would just be reasonable. She wrote, "Maeve, I feel like there has been a profound communication breakdown. The work we did together was sacred. The voice we created for Radiant Dawn was a channel for something much larger than either of us. I see now that in the excitement of the launch, some human details were overlooked. I was devastated to learn your name was not in the acknowledgments. It was a terrible oversight by the publisher." It was a lie, of course, a transparent, almost insulting lie. She was trying to shift the blame to a faceless publisher, to position herself as my fellow victim. Then came the offer. "Let's put this behind us. Elysian is prepared to offer you a full co-author credit on the Meridian Self, along with a significant increase in your fee. We can release a joint statement, clear the air, and get back to the beautiful work we were meant to do together. Let's not let negativity and ego derail this incredible journey." Her using the word ego was the final straw. My ego? I had sublimated my ego for 2 years to build her a career. I had worked in silence and anonymity. The ego in this equation belonged to the woman who believed she was a channel for the universe but couldn't write a coherent paragraph to save her life. This wasn't about revenge. I told myself that again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. There was a part of me that was enjoying this, the part of me that had sat in meetings, biting my tongue while my ideas were stolen, the part that had been condescended to, patronized, and ultimately erased. That part of me was reveling in their panic, and I wasn't going to feel guilty about it. I did not reply to Simone's email. I forwarded it to Arthur with a single note. "Look at this." 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Julian. I almost didn't answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. His voice was completely different. The whiskey-smooth confidence was gone, replaced by a strained, desperate tone. "Maeve," he said, his voice tight. "You got Simone's email. We can make this right. Name your price. A bigger credit, more money, a development deal, whatever you want. Just tell us what it will take to make this go away." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I wanted him to feel it. The complete and total loss of control. Camille was a man who lived on leverage, and he had just realized he had none. I said, calmly and quietly, "There is nothing you can offer me, Julian. You had the chance to do the right thing, and you chose not to. This isn't a negotiation." "But what do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What is the point of all this?" I thought for a moment, looking at the manuscript for my real version of the Meridian Self sitting on my desk. I said, "The point, Julian, is that you can't build an empire on a stolen foundation. It's not about what I want from you. It's about what I'm going to build without you." I hung up the phone. The first phase, the silent takeover, was complete. They were cornered, disarmed, and terrified. The next phase was the public dismantling, and for that, Clara's full article was set to be published in the print edition of Publishers Weekly in 2 days. The real storm was about to break. The power shift didn't happen like a sudden earthquake. It was more like watching a dam crack. First a trickle, then a fissure, then a catastrophic failure. The publication of Clara's full-page article in Publishers Weekly was the moment the dam broke. The headline was brutal and direct. "The Ghost in the Machine: How a Bestseller Sequel Unraveled into Allegations of Fraud." The article was a masterpiece of journalistic takedown. It laid out the entire story, starting with the coded acrostic, the digital watermark that had become the story's irresistible hook. It detailed my 2 years of uncredited work, supported by the anonymous testimony of the other writers Elysian had burned. It painted a damning portrait of a publishing house that valued celebrity and marketing buzz over creative integrity, and it printed, in full, Simone's desperate email to me, followed by my simple, damning refusal. The contrast was devastating. She looked like a desperate, manipulative fraud. I looked like someone who had simply chosen to reclaim her power. The exodus began within hours of the article hitting the newsstands, and more importantly, the inboxes of everyone in the industry. The first to go was Elysian's biggest cash cow, a mega-church pastor with a franchise of self-help books. His agent released a statement saying they were deeply concerned by the allegations and were exploring all contractual options. It was a polite way of saying, "We're out." Next came a wave of smaller authors, the mid-list writers who relied on the publisher's reputation. They saw the writing on the wall. A house accused of rampant, systemic creative theft was not a safe place to build a career. Their defections were quieter, happening in frantic calls between agents and lawyers, but Arthur, with his network of sources, kept me updated. He'd forward me emails with subject lines like, "Another one bites the dust." It felt less like a victory and more like watching a natural, inevitable collapse. I hadn't pushed them off the cliff, I had simply revealed that they were standing on thin air. The most satisfying departure, for me, was a celebrity chef whose cookbook I had been forced to edit a year ago. He was a notorious bully, and his recipes were a mess. I had spent a month turning his culinary gibberish into a usable, beautiful book. His public statement was dripping with sanctimony. "My brand is built on authenticity and trust," he declared. "I cannot, in good conscience, remain affiliated with a publisher that does not share those core values." I had to laugh. The man wouldn't know an authentic core value if it was garnishing his plate. But his hypocrisy was useful. It added to the growing chorus of condemnation. The desperate counter from Simone and Julian was exactly what I expected. They tried to go on the offensive. They hired a high-powered crisis PR firm and a notoriously aggressive litigator. The first move was a cease and desist letter sent to me and to Veritas Press. It was a work of fiction, accusing me of breach of contract, tortious interference, and defamation. It threatened a multi-million-dollar lawsuit if we didn't retract the story and issue a public apology. Arthur laughed when he read it. He called it a panicked tantrum on expensive letterhead. Our own lawyer, a quiet shark-like woman named Eleanor whom Veritas kept on retainer, drafted a response that was a model of legal dismissiveness. It was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph stated that all claims in the article were true and thoroughly documented. The second paragraph essentially said, "See you in court." We sent it back within the hour. The threat of a lawsuit was a scare tactic, and they knew it. A lawsuit would mean discovery. It would mean depositions under oath. It would mean they would have to turn over emails, documents, and text messages. A lawsuit wasn't a threat to us. It was a threat to them. It was the last thing on earth they wanted. Then came the final, most pathetic attempt. Simone tried to get to me through my past. She must have had someone dig into my life, because I got a call from my ex-boyfriend, a man I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. He sounded uncomfortable. He said, "Hey, this is weird, but Simone's people reached out to me. They offered me money to talk to some reporter, to say you were unstable, that you had a history of being vindictive. I told them to get lost. But I thought you should know." That was a new low, even for them. They weren't just trying to discredit me professionally. They were trying to poison me personally. It was a classic tactic used against women who speak up, paint them as crazy, as emotional, as unreliable narrators of their own lives. But it backfired. It only made them look more desperate, more vicious. I thanked my ex for his integrity and hung up, a fresh wave of cold resolve washing over me. They were not just my professional adversaries anymore. They had made it personal, and they would regret it. The final power shift happened not in a boardroom, but in the court of public opinion. A clip from an old interview with Simone, filmed during the Radiant Dawn press tour, went viral. In it, the interviewer asks her about her writing process. Simone, smiling her serene, empty smile, says, "Honestly, I don't even feel like I'm writing it. The words just flow through me. It's a completely intuitive process. I just open a channel to the universe and the wisdom pours out." Someone had edited the video. They had intercut Simone's interview with screenshots of Clara's article, with the words "MAV" and "fraud" from the acrostic flashing on screen every time Simone said "I" or "me." The video was brutal, hilarious, and utterly devastating. It had millions of views in a day. Simone became a meme, a laughingstock, the wellness guru who needed a ghostwriter to channel the universe for her. Her carefully constructed brand of wise authenticity was shattered, replaced by the image of a clueless charlatan. It was over. She was over, and she had done it to herself. All I did was hold up a mirror. The final confrontation was not what I expected. There were no dramatic speeches, no tearful confessions. It happened in the lobby of Veritas Press, a week after the meme went viral. I was there to sign my new contract. My own book, The Meridian Self, was being fast-tracked for publication. My name was on the contract as the sole author. I was also signing on as an editor-at-large, with a mandate to find and develop new, authentic voices. My name was about to go on an office door. As I was leaving, the elevator doors opened, and there she was. Simone. She looked smaller in person, stripped of her aura of celebrity. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy. She was with Julian, who looked gaunt and exhausted. They were there, I later found out, for a humiliating meeting with their lawyers to discuss the terms of Elysian Press officially dropping them. They had come to beg, to salvage something from the wreckage. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the polished marble floor. The air crackled with unspoken words. Julian looked away first, unable to meet my gaze. But Simone held it. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something worse. It was blank. The empty vessel I had once been paid to fill was now on public display. I gave her a small, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger you pass on the street. I was about to walk away, but she took a step forward. Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "Why?" she asked. "We had something beautiful." I stopped and turned back to her. I thought about all the rage, all the pain, all the righteous indignation I had felt. But looking at her now, a hollowed-out brand, a ghost in her own life, I felt nothing but a kind of weary pity. I said, "You didn't have something beautiful, Simone. You had something you bought, and you forgot that the person you bought it from still had the receipt." Then I said the words she had used so often, the hollow platitudes I had written for her. "You have to be authentic. You have to own your own story. This is your journey of self-discovery. You manifested this." Her face crumpled. She finally understood. I had taken the language of her brand, the very words I had created for her, and turned them into a weapon against her. I had used her own facade to demolish the building. I turned and walked out of the lobby, into the bright New York City sunlight. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life was over. The news came later that day, via a push alert on my phone from Publishers Weekly. Elysian Press officially severs ties with author Simone and agent Julian Croft. The system had corrected itself. The antagonists hadn't just been defeated, they had been removed from the board. My new reality began to take shape. My office at Veritas was on the 27th floor, with a window that looked out over the entire city. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it was mine. The small brass plaque on the door read, "Maeve Riley, Editor-at-Large." My full name. No collaboration, no ghosting, just me. I spent the next few months building my new life. I worked with Arthur to find new writers, talented people who had great stories but lacked the platform. I looked for the quiet ones, the ones who did the work without fanfare. I made it my mission to ensure they were protected, credited, and valued. My own book went into production, seeing the cover mock-up for the first time, with the Meridian Self in large type and my name, Maeve Riley, right under it, was a feeling I can't quite describe. It felt like coming home. It was never about the money, though the advance Veritas gave me was more than I had ever seen in my life. It was never about the fame, though the story of the Acrostic had made me something of a folk hero in the publishing world. It was never about revenge. I stand by that. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional act. What I did was cold, precise, and logical. It was an audit. I found a discrepancy in the books, and I corrected it. Simone and Julian were a rounding error in a system that had, for too long, profited from injustice. Their erasure was simply balancing the ledger. The real victory wasn't watching them fall. It was in what I built in the aftermath. It was in the team I assembled at Veritas, the authors whose careers I helped launch, the culture of respect and integrity we insisted on. The true vindication wasn't in their destruction but in my own creation. I had taken back my name, yes, but I had also built a world where I would never have to fight for it again. So this story, which started with an act of erasure, ends with an act of creation. It's a reminder that your name, your work, and your worth are your own. No one can take them from you unless you let them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to shout, but to write your own story, in your own voice, and sign your name to it with unshakable pride. The best revenge isn't living well, it's building better. And that's my story. It's the story of how a ghostwriter decided to stop being invisible and claim her own voice. It's a testament to the idea that the person who builds the house knows exactly how to take it apart, brick by brick. But more than that, it's about having the courage to build your own house afterward, with a foundation of integrity and a door with your own name on it. Now I want to talk to you directly. I know that there are people watching this right now who have felt what I felt. You've been overlooked in a meeting. You've had your idea stolen by a boss. You've poured your heart and soul into a project, only to be pushed aside when it was time to take a bow. Your story might not involve a celebrity wellness guru or a coded acrostic, but the feeling is universal. The sting of being erased is a pain that runs deep. I want you to know this. Your work has value, your voice matters, and your name is your own. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. The world is full of people who will try to take credit for the sun you bring into the room. Do not let them. Be the architect of your own life. Build your foundations strong. And if you have to, if someone tries to steal what is rightfully yours, don't be afraid to show them the blueprint. Show them that you know where every single load-bearing wall is. This journey wasn't about revenge for me. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back the narrative. And I want to empower you to do the same. Your career, your life, is your story to write. Don't ever hand the pen to someone else. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something inside of you, please do me a favor, like this video, so that the algorithm knows that stories of quiet strength and professional integrity matter. Leave a comment below and share a time you felt underestimated, or if you're comfortable, a time you successfully stood your ground. Reading your stories helps all of us feel less alone in these struggles. Share this video with anyone you know who needs to hear this message, anyone who needs a reminder of their own power. And finally, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. I'm building a community here, a place for architects, for builders, for anyone who believes in the power of their own voice, and I want you to be a part of it. Thank you for listening.